Hi, today we are going to do a code review of a project called the Coinbase Pro SDK by Mocking Magician. Now Coinbase is a service that you can use to buy and sell your bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. And this project implements an API client for that. I can see that this project has a fairly good code coverage, which means the amount of code lines that is covered by automatic tests. 89% looks really good, especially for a business-critical software like this, but as we all know, good looks is what gets you interested, but what's inside is what really matters. So let's have a look at the code. The first thing I notice is how you configure this library. You give it a bunch of boolean arguments. And I think this is not acceptable for a business-critical software like this. It's really hard as a human to make sure that these booleans are in correct order. And especially when we account for the time passing and the code changing, it's really easy for these lines to just get mangled up with the comments next to them. I always discourage to use booleans as arguments for your functions, and especially in a situation like this. But fortunately, we have another method of configuring this library, and that is by giving it a configuration file. And this looks much better. I think this should be the primary way or even the only way to configure this project if done like this. The next thing I notice is that you should be using something called API Factory to create your API client. Now I think that this is not a factory, not even remotely. I would encourage the author to read a book called Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. Because in this book there is defined what an abstract factory pattern and the factory method pattern really means. And this is the source of this information. And I always encourage you to find the sources of your information, especially in a situation like this, where the information is 25 years old, there are many broken phones, and you can end up in a situation where the blind is leading the blind. So always go to the source, and for the factory design patterns, this book is your go-to source. Okay, let's continue. Now I think that the API factory that's used here with a static method called createFromYAMLconfig should be just a regular constructor for the class. Let me show you what I mean. I think the class should be called Coinbase API or a Coinbase API client. But then it's pretty obvious that the Coinbase API client shouldn't be reading YAML files. So I suggest that you would have another kind of configuration class that has the static method that can be used for reading the configuration files. But with this kind of approach, you could have configurations with chain defaults and per property overrides, like I have done here. With this kind of approach, you would not need to have anonymous booleans, but you would always have names that's associated with your booleans. And you would start with something sane, like everything would be enabled or disabled, and then you would just change your wanted properties one by one. But that's enough for the constructors and factories. Let's get back to the code. Now if we look at the folder structure, I can see that there is a docs folder, and this folder only includes index.md file. This index.md file is an exact copy of the readme.md file in the root folder, so I think this is safe to remove from the Git. It might be that this project is using some kind of static hosting like GitHub Pages, but in that case I would suggest to use some kind of plugin like GH Pages to handle the dirty works. You can find more information in my first video. Now next, let's look at the tests. So let's go to the test folder, open up func and connectivity, and open up the abstract test.php. Now this class is meant to be a common ancestor for all the other tests that you run in this project. But the issue is here. We always sleep 750,000 microseconds in every setup phase. That means before every test that we run. And making your tests slower is just unacceptable. It should at least have a really clear comment on what this is trying to do, or better yet, removed completely. Same goes if we go to the connectivity/reports test.php. So here you can see that we are always sleeping for 10 seconds just to wait for the report generation. Now it can be that the report will be generated within 10 seconds, which is probably the case, but it might be not in some edge cases, and then you would end up with a failing test just because you didn't sleep for enough time. But probably in most cases your test will succeed before the 10 seconds time frame, and now you are just making your tests run slower just because you are waiting for some arbitrary number of seconds each time you run this test. My rule of thumb is that you should never sleep in your test. Okay, let's look at the next test file. This time we are going to look at the stablecoin conversion test. And now you can see that the stablecoin conversion object exposes a method called createConversionRaw. And what we get back from this method is a string. And you can see that the string format has pretty much the same information as the object format. But I think this is an implementation detail that A should not be tested and B should not be exposed, so be kept as a private method and not be tested at all. You usually test this kind of implementation details by creating tests that go through these lines in your code. Now the last point on code comes from something called Stablecoinconversiondatainterface.php. Let's go there. So we go to src, contracts, DTO, and then Stablecoinconversiondatainterface.php. Now this is an interface that is only used in just one implementation. And I think that's a code smell that's really common in object-oriented languages like Java. Because if you have just one implementation of an interface, then you probably don't need to have the interface in the first place. So don't repeat yourself and don't waste your time maintaining this kind of duplication of your code in a language that really doesn't need it. Okay, but there's one more thing. Let's have a look at the commit messages in this repository. So here you can see some of the commit messages in this repository. So this commit has a commit message of fix, and it fixes something by removing one test file. Now I think that you write commit messages for your future self. And in the future, when you are debugging something, then git blame is your friend. And when you learn to use git blame, then you won't be using commit messages like this ever again. I really recommend to have a look at the How to Write a Git Commit Message blog post by Chris Beams. I think this blog post really outlines what it takes to write a really good commit message and why you should be doing that. Okay, this is all I have for you this time. If you have any comments, especially if you disagree with me, please leave a comment below. Because I love to be wrong and I love to learn new things. If you like this video, please subscribe. Thank you for watching and happy coding!